We're underway. Cool. So firstly, really excited for the discussion today. Great panel. Really glad to be joined by Daniel, Ben, and Michelle. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves in a second. Firstly, my name is Jack Teal. I'm the APAC commercial lead at Mayday. We're on a mission to mend month end for larger Xero businesses, beginning with the needs of those who are multi-entity. We're talking intercompany recharges, intercompany bank reconciliations, and reconciling bank feeds across the group as well. As a little bit of background on me, I started my career in accounting about 10 years ago at PwC, where I did my chartered. I then worked in small local practice for about 3-4 years, working with small businesses, SMEs, and then have spent the last 5 or so years in a variety of fun, but hectic, exciting startup roles in the Xero ecosystem. So I've got a lot of Xero experience on both sides, and personally, I'm really passionate and bullish about where Xero is going. And in my role at Mayday, I've been privileged to see the success of a lot of larger businesses who are succeeding on the platform still. So although I think Xero is still in a really good, strong place for the future, I think the content being provided to in-house finance leaders at that larger end of town haven't necessarily been, or it just hasn't been there, hasn't been quite that good quality. So really glad to be here representing CFO Tech Stack, speaking to you all. So yeah, thanks for coming. I might pause here and hand to our panelists to quickly introduce themselves. So if I can hand to you first, Ben, go for it.
Hi there, so Ben Watiwat here. So I'm VP Finance at Immutable. So my experience, I've been in accounting for about 15 years now. Started my career at Deloitte in audit and corporate finance, and then moved into the startup space about 12 years ago. So, basically my focus has been probably for the last 12 years on scaling businesses that are looking to kind of go global day one. So across telco, primarily kind of tech startups, so safety culture, indebted, and now Immutable. So really focused on those that high growth, move fast and break things type industry, and really focusing around how do we use processes, systems, and tools to help us continue to grow, but without trying to avoid incurring huge amounts of costs, given that you're as a startup, you're still in a cost constrained environment.
Perfect. Going global from day one sounds very relevant for the discussion today. Michelle, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Michelle Kvello. I'm the founder of Lantern Partners. We are a CFO advisory business providing fractional CFO resources to founders of startups and scale-ups. So that's a variety of different sizes. We do some more startup businesses, but really it's at that scaling up stage that we get involved and really start providing that commercial and strategic advice that at a very new startup stage, you're more focused on the health and hygiene of finance than the forward-looking lens. So that's where we jump in.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. And Daniel.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Jorgensen from Airwallex. So currently looking after partnerships and integrations in ANZ, specifically looking at professional services, accountants, bookkeepers, etc. But previous to this, held a few other commercial roles in Airwallex. So had the opportunity to work with, very small kind of businesses getting started, right through to larger clients of ours, which are multi-entity, global, all around the world, etc. And yeah, looking forward to kind of discussing a lot more around multi-entity today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to the discussion. Great resumes for the chat today. Before we jump into the agenda, which I'll cover in just a sec, just a little bit more background here on the series, the Building Enterprise Level System with Xero series and the concept. As I mentioned earlier, I work at Mayday. We work with larger Xero businesses, and something that we hear a lot from our own customers is Xero still the right accounting platform for me? If so, how long is that going to be the case? These are the questions we want the series to help answer, each diving into a specific area of interest. And part of wanting to answer that is really dealing with the concern around the move to an ERP being a horrible and hectic situation for some, as one of our clients mentioned, and really wanting to give everybody here ER peace of mind that they know when or how far they can go with Xero before they need to worry about an ERP. There's definitely a misconception out there that Xero is only for small businesses. A big part of that is probably their own marketing messaging that they have on their website. The reality is Xero as an accounting platform, as a ledger, can go a long way with you as you leverage as you can leverage the Xero ecosystem. So hopefully today we can solve a few of those challenges for you, or answer a few of your questions around navigating and optimizing FX as you go global, deal with international trade, remote employees, all of these kinds of things. But just as a final reminder, this isn't a Mayday webinar. There's no product marketing from my side. There's no demos happening today either from us or Airwallex. It's very much just a conversation around this area of interest to try and provide you as much firsthand experience from people who have been there and done that. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today. I'll just move over to our next slide, which is the agenda. So we've got a few quick kind of core topics we want to cover. Firstly, what does Xero do well with respect to FX? What can you handle without an additional add-on? Then as you grow up, as you become a little bit more complex, maybe your team grows, maybe you're hiring people remotely, maybe you're doing some more international trade. What are the pains that you're going to begin to experience, or the additional costs you're going to begin to incur if you're just using Xero and no other add-on? How can you then leverage the Xero ecosystem? What does that look like to partner up with somebody else, add something to your tech stack there, and what is the core outcomes that you can achieve? It'd be great to hear from the team here as to what they've done. And then we can discuss, as we have with all of the sessions, when might an ERP be the only solution? Now, just like anything, ERPs are never going to be a situation of just because we have some complex FX requirements, we're going to move to an ERP. It's an all-encompassing thing, and we're going to discuss this throughout the series, but each time hopefully providing some new elements. So I want to get started on the conversation now. Michelle, I might go to you first with respect to number one. So what does Xero do well in this space? What are the needs of a business that is, maybe planning to scale or planning to grow and might foresee some of this, I suppose, international trade or FX complexities coming into play relatively early in their lifespan? And yeah, I'd just like to hear from you as to maybe where Xero does things well and then where they might begin to experience some pain.
Sure. And I think the important thing to remember is that Xero as a standalone, it's a general ledger, and there's a reporting suite that sits within that. It doesn't in itself facilitate FX transfers or do any kind of quasi banking things, which is when leveraging the ecosystem becomes really important. But it can deal with foreign currency transactions, it can deal with transfers, it can deal with translating payments that come in. You can set up invoicing in foreign currencies, you can accept bank feeds from foreign or not in our case AUD based currencies. You can set up functional currencies that aren't just for the country that you're based in. One example for us is we support a Singapore-based entity that has USD as its functional currency. That's easy to set up, and Xero deals very well with that. So really, all of those kind of foreign currency concerns or requirements, it does really well, and it has feeds that come in from, I think it's xe.com, that come in on a daily basis, and it does the month-end close in terms of retranslating balances and all those things that you need to have a compliant set of books. So all of that Xero does really well. The only thing that it can't do, aside from the functional kind of banking and transactional elements, is that it only can give you one functional currency for Xero. There are some instances where you may need to report in different currencies for the same entity, and that's Xero doesn't do that. But in terms of the basics, it does a really great job.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the consistent message that we're hearing across every topic is Xero does the basics really well. And I think you called out a couple of really key points, Michelle. I mean, Ben, I'd be keen to get your perspective too, from your own experience. You've been working with a few businesses that are trying to go global from day one. So are you beginning with just Xero, or are you straight away looking to solve pains that you know you're going to have? How do you see what Xero does well, and where your growing pains going to come from?
Yeah, I think I echo Michelle's point around Xero. I think it works quite well, and I think when people that are used to Xero don't realize how much functionality Xero has until they move to an ERP where everything that they need to do is an additional add-on that needs to be purchased. So there's a lot of kind of incremental things that Xero does. Bank feeds is one example where it's quite quick and easy to integrate. The app marketplace is also another place where, it's a lot easier to just, I'm just going to deploy a new app to help me support my Xero instance. That takes 10 seconds versus, a 3-week implementation timeline with NetSuite. So a lot of the basics that you need from a accounting system, Xero handles perfectly. The core of it is really around that. It depends on the complexity of the business and what you're trying to do, but for the most part, you can remain on Xero for a fairly substantial amount of time. And then in terms of kind of the FX side, I think the payments, the functional currency side is probably the one that is the trickiest. It's primarily in Australia. If you have US investors that want US reporting, you can't do that with an Australian Xero instance. You can only do it in Australian dollars, which is one of the pain points that we experience. So those are the kind of the functional currency challenges are the ones that Xero hasn't been able to solve today.
Yeah, okay. And then also, I mean, Michelle also called out, it's not in the banking space. It's not going to handle your spend management for you. So how do you see those two systems working together? And then Daniel, after Ben's spoken, I'll be keen to get your thoughts on it as you have a lot of first-hand experience there. How do you see the coming together of, I suppose,
So I think when people start off doing things and going global, they find that they'll use their Big Four bank. They'll have a business bank account with Westpac or one of the Big Four, and they'll start to do overseas payments. And those overseas payments cost you $20-25 a pop. And then there's also correspondent bank fees that the recipient has to pay. So, you pay $100 to a recipient, they'll receive $80 because their bank takes $20 out at the same time. So that's as you start to have more and more international suppliers, that becomes a huge pain point for your business. And that's something that we've experienced multiple times in terms of having to solve, vendors being angry that they've been short paid because, there are funds being taken out all the way through the banking process. So I think probably the segue is, a tool like Airwallex is where we've solved those issues. And that's primarily because it allows you to settle local currencies using the local payment networks. So for example, like to give you kind of an example of it, if I send $100 via kind of a telegraphic transfer, that'd cost me $20 on the way out from the bank, and I may lose $20 to the recipient for the bank fees being taken out through the process. What I can do instead is say I'll have that US dollars, but I'll send that US dollars via local US banking rails. So what that means is instead of people seeing it as an international transfer, it's a domestic transfer. It happens quicker, it happens cheaper, and you reduce a lot of the friction that you get from international suppliers because they just see it as just like a PID transaction here in Australia.
Okay. I think that provides some really good context and probably, segues really nicely to you, Daniel. I'm keen to get your thoughts on what Michelle and Ben have both said around this space and what you see firsthand with people coming to you guys and saying, hey, we're dealing with these challenges. What are those growing pains, or what are the things that people are coming to you most often looking for, and what's the outcome that they can get?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like continuing the example that Ben was giving there and kind of bringing it back to what Michelle was saying with Xero is like, it's kind of a perfect example. Like you might start to use Airwallex to solve those problems, and it marries quite well with Xero because it's multi-currency by default. And so if you're transacting in Australian dollars, you're transacting in US dollars using your Airwallex account, like it's very seamless from that transactional perspective, but then the feed as well on the back end after you've done those activities, what it looks like back in Xero is really, really simple. It's just your Airwallex AUD account, it's your Airwallex USD account, and you'll see those transactions represented locally in each of those currencies as well. And so it really complements the services that we provide really, really nicely, where it makes like we're making that transactional side of things quite easy. And then it's making the reconciliation or accounting piece of that really easy after you've done the activities with Airwallex. and yeah, similar to Ben, I think especially during COVID, post-COVID, going international, going global from day dot is really top of mind for most businesses now. And that's typically what a lot of our clients are doing. Like they're thinking about how can I engage with customers in different markets, and how do I, I'm no longer restricted to just hiring or obtaining suppliers locally in Australia. Like I can think globally for where I get my talent or where I want to transact with different suppliers for. And so your legacy banks typically don't support that very well, where, tomorrow you might have just signed a contract with someone in Greece and you're like, okay, how do I actually collect euros now? Like, I don't know how to do this. And my bank says it's going to take me 2 weeks. Whereas an Airwallex account, like you could spin that up in less than a minute and put that on your invoice and give those details away. So I think they're kind of the details, which really allows you to be very fast when you want to react and think globally and transact globally, with using a financial services platform like Airwallex.
Okay, so I mean, so is there a tipping point here around volume or complexity where this becomes relevant and you want another system like Airwallex or another, or is it very much as soon as you're doing one transaction, it makes sense to be having one of these things? How do you guys see it?
Yeah, I mean, like in my experience, for example, it's very much what Ben says. Like, typically, the default thing is you open an account with Big Four Bank or something like this, and then you start to do some international transactions. And then all of a sudden, you realize, oh, I'm really overpaying for these services. And I think that it's like that frequency when it really starts to add up, that you become a bit cognizant of it.
I'm worried. Go, Michelle. You're right.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think there's a couple of other points to that as well, in terms of, I think a lot of businesses think I'm kind of operating internationally from a customer perspective. But even the smallest businesses these days, if you think about the amount of USD subscriptions that come through a business, that can really quickly add up. And also, there's quite a lot of volatility when you've got fluctuating exchange rates. So just where you can minimize that or kind of control that as early as possible, it is worth considering, even if you're not doing a significant amount of even supplier transactions internationally. There's still value in considering it, because as a proportion of your expenses as your overheads, it's relatively large even for a new business or a small business. And for us, one of the big challenges as we've had businesses going overseas is just opening up those bank accounts overseas. It's so difficult. I mean, they want your firstborn child, and as well as your house, as well as your right limb. And it can really take away pain points by actually being able to open up kind of a global wallet to do those transactions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you started to get into it there, Michelle. I mean, Ben's mentioned a couple of fees that you begin to incur as you transact internationally, and the topic is optimizing, navigating and optimizing for FX. So without spending too much on it, I'd be keen to get, some detail here from you guys around what optimizing FX is. What should people be thinking about? Is the rate that I'm getting, regardless of the $20 fee one way and another way, is the rate that I'm getting from one bank and another bank the same? How do I know I'm getting a good rate? What's the dollar impact that we're talking about here with a slight difference in rate between a bank? Do I need to be, it sounds like I should be caring about it. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on how big of a issue this can become.
Yeah, so I can probably jump in on that quickly. I think if you're looking at FX more generally, there's a couple of different things that you want to be aware of. I think the first one is obviously fees. So that's not just the transactional fees that happen in terms of actually making payments outbound. The second part is the spread, which is the difference between the bank rate and the rate that you actually receive. Most banks will charge you out the nose for it, so anywhere up to about 3 to 5% is kind of standard for doing foreign currency transactions in banks. I know we use Airwallex as one of our providers, and the cost to us is substantially less. And that's straight savings to us. So to give you an example, we spend at least $1 million a month on foreign currency payments. 3% is not an insignificant amount of money in that respect. So it's kind of, it becomes, as you continue to grow and as you continue to scale, it becomes quite a substantial saving over time for almost very little work by comparison. The other thing I would mention is when you're thinking about FX globally, think about where your sources and uses of FX come from. So if you're receiving US dollars as revenue, think about using those US dollars to pay bills rather than converting your Australian dollars into US dollars and then paying US dollars. Use your currencies as a natural hedge to allow you to effectively just manage your treasury positions across the board. And, when you've got the ability to kind of see all of that on a single pane of glass, it becomes quite easy to do because you can say, okay, well, where does my liquidity sit and what do I need to do? So think of it in that respect. The last thing I'd say is don't try and game FX. It's like whatever you try and do, it's going to be wrong in terms of trying to time the markets. So really it's about blending that and getting that cost average correct.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Thanks, Ben. I might move on to kind of point 3. I mean, we've obviously started the discussion around solutions to some of these problems. Michelle, you work with a lot of different businesses in your role, and obviously you've seen a lot of different things. What's your, if someone's tuning into this and thinking, okay, yeah, I'm starting to hit those limits, maybe I should be starting to think about, a solution to this problem. What is the broader area of interest here for you? What are you seeing your clients using? Happy to get into specific tools, but also happy to just get into what are the nuances people need to be thinking about, whether I'm going with direction A or direction B here, different tools, or maybe there's different components to this that I'm not thinking about. What are you seeing? What are you recommending? It'd be good to get your perspective.
On FX specifically, or kind of just generally through the ecosystem?
Well, I think within the realm of this space. So
Yeah.
I guess FX, we're talking about paying accounts, we're talking about spend management. So, we've had a separate webinar on spend management, but I think it is closely enough aligned here that it's relevant. So yeah, just anything in that realm.
Yeah, so we tend to kind of try and take a bit of a helicopter view of it when we're looking across the operations of finance and the business. So that is not only where we're spending the money, the territories we're operating in, but who is spending the money as well. As the business starts to grow, one of the things that we are helping founders with, because it's primarily founder-run businesses we're working with, and generally they've got the business to a certain stage and scale by being very across a lot of not just decisions, but a lot of kind of practical administration and organization. For example, approving all of the invoices that come in, doing kind of 90 to 100% of the traveling, designing or authorizing invoices going out to customers. And as we start to put more of a process around that, and as the founder takes their kind of hands off all of those tools, actually having systems to make sure that the approvals are working correctly, so that it's not you have different layers of hierarchy when it comes to approving certain payments. You can start looking at payments when certain people are traveling, for example. That's a big one for us, is that the cards that are available through systems like Airwallex, we're actually able to go and spend natural currency kind of when we're over in the USD. Ben raised the example of natural hedging. That's something that we're always talking to founders about. They've heard of hedging. They know they should be doing it maybe because they're dealing in different currencies. But if they can naturally hedge it, it's a far more intuitive way of managing their different funds and currencies. So those are some of the things that we're looking at beyond kind of Xero and kind of looking through the ecosystem, is how do we manage those approvals? How do we manage individual department heads starting to have control over budgets and spending and things like that?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Michelle. And you've given some good insight into the different types of problems that are being solved by these systems. Daniel, I'm keen to get, from your side, this better than anyone, what the tools like Airwallex can do for a business. So, if anyone's thinking, okay, cool, I'll go check this out. Great. I want to start managing my FX better. I want to minimize my fees or be able to open up a a card overseas, for a remote employee. Great. Those are three elements of a tool like Airwallex. What else are the core things people need to realize that these tools can do for you?
Yeah, I think in that, like exactly what Michelle was saying, there's this like maturity level or this maturity scale that you kind of start to progress up, where these things become more and more important, where you want to make sure that you have the processes in place and you have the oversight or that audit trail over what's happening. And I think that's where you start to go from, maybe just using making a single transfer out of Airwallex to, okay, now you're actually going to start using the spend management software out of it. And that's like that scale that you go up. And then this is kind of airing into the next section about when you might go up to an ERP system, but it's how does that work across this entire life cycle or spectrum, right from that founder level where you've got full control and these things are maybe less important to now you've fully progressed and you've got multiple divisions, multiple legal entities, and you need to have this organizational view of everything that's happening in your spend management. This is very much like what we're cognizant of at Airwallex and trying to cater more and more as our customers at the moment. Like, for example, Xero is the largest customer base. As they start to scale to become larger, bigger, multi-entity Xero users, to when you're like Ben, for example, and now you've taken that step to upgrade to an ERP like NetSuite, and how do we support our clients across that entire life cycle?
Yeah, okay. So you're saying kind of in the beginning, it might just be a matter of saying, I just need to set up a US account or a pound account to do some small transactions. Then at some point, I might need a virtual card, or I might need a physical card. And then I might need some employees to be sending through some receipts for their transactions overseas. Then I actually need some approvals built into that workflow. Then, we've got some more complex needs as we grow up from there. Okay, cool. No worries. And so do you see yourselves working alongside big banks as well? Like, within a business, Ben, are you using Airwallex, but also have a relationship with a bigger bank for other things? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think we leverage both. So for us, Airwallex, we use that for our kind of primary payments out, but we use larger banks for treasury management. So, the money that we raise from venture capital and the like, we'll store that in a bigger bank. And that's not a reflection of Airwallex, that's just more, we're able to get, significant yield off that balance through banking and other relationships that we have with treasury providers. I probably want to call out something just in terms of, the Xero ecosystem. I think one of the key points as you're scaling is when you go multi-entity. And, the Xero does single entity very well. It needs help to do multi-entity, but you'll find that as you move into new markets, you'll need to start creating new entities in other jurisdictions. And that's where ecosystem tools like Airwallex can help by bringing all of those different relationships together in terms of, you can have a centralized payment stack sitting in Airwallex, but, they do connect to multiple Xero instances because you have separate legal entities in different places.
Oh, great. That's good to know. Cool. Thanks, Ben. So Michelle, you started mentioning the ERP side, or was that Daniel? I can't remember who exactly mentioned it first, but I think it's probably time to move to that fourth dot point. And just a reminder to anyone who's listening in, we've got the Q&A open. So if you've got any specific questions, either about Airwallex or about the experience that Ben and Michelle have had, feel free to throw it in there. If you're listening, I imagine this is a relevant topic for you. So if you've got questions, chuck them in, and we'll definitely address those at the end. But yeah, I wanted to move down to that ERP conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, I appreciate that generally speaking, across all of these sessions, it's not one particular thing that leads a business to have to go ERP, although it does sound like there's a component here around needing to manage or report in multiple currencies out of a single file that might actually be a trigger point for this. But I mean, what have you seen, Michelle, with your larger businesses? Are they knocking on the door of an ERP? Are they wanting to go to an ERP? Are they wanting to stay on Xero? What have you seen?
Yeah, and it's definitely a conversation as the businesses get bigger. The challenge for a lot of businesses that we're working with is that a lot of founders, are looking for that exit point as opposed to raising capital and growing and continuing to stay within the business. So there is that business. There's two things. One, there's the business case consideration of, the reality is moving to an ERP system is an expensive exercise. It's expensive in terms of time internally within the business, and then it's just bluntly expensive from a dollar perspective. And so when you think about the payback period and the cost benefit, for a lot of the businesses that we're working with, it's not worth it for a window of a couple of years. I think you've got to be looking at this as a long-term solution for the business, because if you're a business that's a founder that's looking to exit and you're looking to sell to, and the reality for us, it's usually a much bigger business. A lot of the time they're listed, a lot of the time they're overseas. You are not going to be able to take all of your systems and processes into that transaction. You're going to be adopting what that new parent company does. And so that does become part of the consideration. And as we were saying before, now you can stretch the Xero system and capability so much further through the ecosystem, and using that ecosystem and the connected apps in a really smart way that we haven't been able to get that business case across the line for the founders that we work with. I think the other thing to bear in mind as well is, and I'm sure Ben can talk more to this, but when you move to an ERP, the benefit of a lot of the benefits of an ERP, it's a much more sophisticated system. But the reason why it takes a lot of money to do that is because you're literally designing it from the ground up in exactly the way that you need it to run for your business, right? Xero is the complete opposite of that. You kind of take Xero and you use it the way in which it was intended, or that's how you should be using it, right? And there is a lot of infrastructure that you have to put around an ERP to make sure that it works properly. It's not just transitioning onto an ERP and there you have it in a box and you're good to go. There's a lot more management to it.
Yeah, no, that's really, I mean, I think that story or that component around the business case and having to look long term is something that hasn't necessarily come up actually. So I think that's a really good addition to the thought process. I mean, Ben, I'm obviously keen to get your thoughts. I know you've been pushing Xero to its limits for a while with the businesses you've worked with. So how do you see this and where are you at now?
Yeah, I think the way I've looked at Xero and is to use it as long as humanly possible. That's both from a cost perspective, but also from an ease of use perspective. So people that use Xero can pick that up. People can pick that up pretty quickly. It's not a complicated system to use. It has a lot of integration, had a lot of add-ons, so a lot of it's very intuitive. For us, I think the way I've looked at it is in terms of where Xero, where it starts to get more complicated is when you start to get these larger corporate groups where you've got a significant number of entities or a significant number of entities that also have foreign currency requirements. For us as a business, we report in US dollars. So an ERP is much better for us from a functionality perspective than Xero is because of the weirdness around AUD USD. To give you an example, when we were trying to report in US dollars, we would effectively have an Australian dollar amount, which would then get converted. Sorry, let me start again. We had a US dollar balance, which got converted into Australian dollars into Xero, which we then had to convert back into US dollars for reporting purposes. So what you'd see is a number that should stay flat over the course of 6 months moves up and down quite significantly by the virtue of having FX movements. And that's something that creates a lot of noise and a lot of reporting problems when I'm trying to talk to people around, why did that move so much? It's like, well, it's foreign currency, but it shouldn't. So, a lot of the pain points that arise really are business specific. And I think to echo Michelle's point in terms of, you need to redesign your processes around an ERP. That's exactly right. Like there's a lot of fundamental process re-engineering that has to happen to do ERP, but it really is, it's that there's a tipping point or an inflection point where the level of complexity that you need to manage is exceeded by, if the complexity can't work in Xero. But that point has gotten further and further out over probably the last 10 years. Like I think I bought myself probably another 12 months. Not trying to sell the product, but by buying Mayday, probably bought me another 12 months. Using Fathom, using all these kind of ecosystem apps to handle these things has probably bought me time that if I didn't have those, I probably would have been implementing 12 or 18 months earlier.
And I mean, what's the benefit of someone might say, well, just delaying the inevitable then, aren't you? So what's the tangible benefit to you to being able to push that back 12 months? Is it a matter of saying it gave me more time to think about whether or not we really needed it and to figure out what our growth plans were, or is there other elements to that?
I think in scaling businesses, your time is precious, and there's a lot. Everything, like the analogy I like to use is everything is on fire. The entire house is on fire, and it's your job as a finance person to figure out which room you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And the being able to push out the implementation timeline buys you not only time, but also allows you the time and the resource and the headspace to deal with other issues that are more important. So, I think if I was to, like on a hierarchy of needs perspective, ERP is, right at the top rather than my base level of requirement, which is keep the lights on, make sure that we're recording transactions correctly, make sure that we're operating as a business. ERP becomes a nice to have. And the longer I can keep that nice to have further out, gives me more time to focus on other parts of my job as a finance person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Ben. And to your point about more and more development keeps happening in this space. Someone else in one of our earlier sessions said, if you had a problem 3 years ago, there's a good chance it's now not a problem. There's a solution for that now. So don't think, 3 years ago I was another business, we ran into these issues, so we went ERP. Well, there's probably an opportunity now where you could revisit the App Store and find a solution to whatever those challenges were, because as the market gets bigger and as people grow up on Xero as well, it seems that there is, Xero's been around for a long time now. There's a lot of businesses that start on it as a beginning platform and then grow up on it and then begin to, run into these issues. And the longer Xero's around, the more of those businesses there's going to be, more of those people facing those challenges, the more opportunity there is for a startup to come in and say, let's solve that. So it feels like the time is ripe for apps in this upper, larger Xero business space.
Absolutely.
I might actually call it there on the main conversation. Daniel, is there anything else that you wanted to add that maybe we haven't got to that you think people need to be aware of from optimizing FX, navigating FX, the broader spend management space that we spoke to? Anything at all that you feel that we haven't covered?
No, I think that kind of covers a lot of like the general kind of use cases that most businesses will find. Obviously, there's like particular use cases and clients that have like very niche uses for mass payouts and different things like that. But broadly, I think this really covers off a lot of it.
Awesome, cool. So I might throw to each of you now. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but basically with just to share one key takeaway from today. It could be something that somebody else said or a tip from your own experience. It could be something you already just said, but just keen to kind of consolidate now the conversation that we've had and leave people with a few small bits that they can kind of remember and focus on. So yeah, Michelle, what would your kind of main takeaway from this conversation be?
I think the main tip for me and a lot of the businesses that I work with is it's never too early to start thinking about this and how you're best optimizing your processes and your costs around foreign currency transactions. Because the reality is we are so globally connected these days. There are very, very few businesses that don't have some sort of exposure.
Great, thanks. Daniel?
Yeah, kind of riffing on that one a little bit, but I think encouraging people just to take a look at other options away from legacy banks. The joy that we kind of see from clients and partners get when they realize, oh, like I'm saving this much time or I'm saving this much money, like why didn't I move earlier? It's like, yeah, it's quite nice to see being able to like help people realize that and like seeing what next generation kind of solutions can do compared to solutions which are decades old.
Yeah, perfect. And Ben?
Yeah, I think it's really around that the hidden cost of FX is probably the biggest thing from mine. So, and that's not just the dollar value, but also in time and friction, and trying to solve those through, you know, being more efficient or using newer age tools is probably the biggest thing I would echo.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I was going to say that a lot of the tools and a lot of the tech that we work with, it's about time saving, it's about efficiency, reducing errors. You know, to have a tool that's literally saving dollars, or, you know, that's the business case is very easy when you can calculate exactly the amount that you would save over the course of a year and put that over the top of the cost and say, you know, regardless of time saving, we've just saved ourselves thousands of dollars through our FX. You know, it makes sense to at least look at this if you're dealing with that stuff. So yeah, thank you all for your time. And obviously, if anyone's out there dealing with this stuff or needing any help, Michelle, you can feel free to reach out to Michelle at Lantern Partners, obviously. And if you want to talk Airwallex, Daniel's a great person to reach out to. I think both are probably available on LinkedIn if you need to find them. And Ben, obviously, he's been there, done that. So if you need you know, get any more of his personal experience, I'm sure he's happy to share it if you reach out. But yeah, thank you all for coming. It doesn't look like we've got any other questions. We had one that's been answered by Daniel, so thank you very much. In terms of what's coming up next in the series, I will point out our Sydney Wrap event again. So just kind of calling this out for anybody who is Sydney-based or New South Wales-based or whoever wants to fly over to Sydney for this. But basically Wednesday, 1st of May, Xero's offered up their HQ for us. So we're putting on a nice intimate event. Tickets are limited, but you know, we ideally would love to have mostly people who are registered for this series to be there. We'd love to host it in every single city, but the reality is we can't do that. So Sydney is the location. But yeah, feel free to scan that barcode, book a ticket for yourself, and come along. We'd love to see, you know, in-house finance leaders, financial controllers, finance managers, CFOs. You know, we'll have a quick presentation to wrap up the series, share some highlights, hear from a few people at Xero too, and there'll be some drinks and nibbles there on the house. So, and there's no cost, so you may as well come along. Cool. I'll put that up in a second again. And then just a reminder on our next 3 sessions. So we've got leveling up management reporting, we've got managing large-scale inventory, and we've got strengthening financial controls. So 3 really big topics to round out the week. And then I think, well, at the beginning of next week, and then we will be very close to finishing up the series. So thanks once again for coming, everybody. Don't forget to get your ticket if you want to come along. And yeah, just really appreciate your time, Ben, Daniel, and Michelle. Thank you.